For you, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, to follow up on some of the comments previously about the wild rice provisions, because I think actually when we heard the bill in this committee, we didn't have full testimony from the MPCA because of the timing of the lawsuit and everything. So just to clarify, you may have fully testified in some other committees, but I don't think we've actually had the full discussion with your input. So it's helpful to be able to do that now. I think that the problem isn't the science itself. The problem is that pollution is expensive. It isn't that, we have this good science. It's just the application would be really expensive because pollution is expensive. And, just so people are understanding that it's not like you've gone back and said, oh, this was bad science, we were wrong. It's that now that we know more about the way that sulfate affects different waters and different ecosystems and different soils and everything that entails, that it becomes more complicated. Pollution isn't simple, and protecting water isn't simple because water has all kinds of things that affect it. So I think it's really a yes and situation. There's all kinds of things that affect wild rice, whether it's water levels or the reseeding efforts and, different kinds of oil pollution, all kinds of things can potentially impact wild rice, but that doesn't mean we should not address sulfate too. I think it's a yes and situation. And I am happy that there has been more effort from folks to address some of those other things, but that doesn't mean that we should ignore the fact that we do know things about the way sulfate impacts wild rice. And so my question for you is, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about if this were to be implemented the way it is in the bill right now, what would some of the consequences be, or what would happen with our, whether we're meeting federal requirements and what's, with clean water, what would some of the consequences be at that other level outside of this legislature if these things became law?
Ms. Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Becker-Finn. You're right. We were not able to testify fully in the Policy and Environment Finance Committees due to the timing of the process with the ALJ. And thank you for acknowledging that. So if this language were passed into law, I am not an attorney, but my understanding is that it prohibits the commissioner from using the new science that was done at the request of the legislature, which resulted in the need for a formula because of what we now understand, the new complexity about how sulfite impacts wild rice. So we couldn't use the new science, and it would prohibit the commissioner from enforcing the existing 10 milligrams. So it would leave us with no water quality standard on sulfate for protection of wild rice. So the Clean Water Act, as I understand it, does not allow states to overturn water quality standards that have been approved by the EPA unless the state replaces it with something that is as protective or more protective of, in this case, the wild rice. So that was how we were able to show with the science that we could be more protective with the new research. But anyway, that's all off the table under the bill. So the bill would leave us with no water quality standards. So no water quality standard is not more protective or as protective as the current 10. So that would have us in violation of federal law. And so that would expose the agency to liability and litigation anytime we tried to write a permit, because the permit would be in conflict with federal law. So that would be a major problem, especially for new or expanding facilities that might need something sooner, a permit sooner rather than later. So we think there would be a lot of litigation were this bill signed into law. Yeah, and I think does that answer your question? I don't know any of the other details. There's more details in the Clean Water Act, and I'm happy to have our lawyers give you a comprehensive list, but that's the biggest one.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, I mean, you answered my question that the consequences of passing this language into law are more than just what happens to wild rice in Minnesota. I mean, it would have greater ramifications for the agency and your ability to do your job in protecting water. So thank you. I think that's helpful. Yeah, I guess I'll just, I mean, just to kind of reiterate, it kind of leaves the agency between a rock and a hard place because it would keep you from, you can't go back to the old way because you've now shown through the science that the old 10 isn't the best way to do it. But then this would also stop you from using the new science to apply, you know, any new standard. And so there's nothing to enforce because you can't just come up with some magic number that isn't based in science either. So it just, you know, it leaves the agency in a difficult position, I think.
To that point, I would say, Representative Becker-Finn, that, you know, in terms of the agency protecting wild rice, they've not done that, okay? They don't write the standard into permits, except one that I know of. It's never been written into a permit, and it's not being enforced. So the agency is not protecting wild rice. So I see you have a comment, and then we'll go to Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to Representative Becker-Finn, thank you for that comment. And I think the important thing here, too, is that because our science was published in international journals and then acclaimed by international ecological and so forth societies, so the science is out there. And if we can't use it, that doesn't mean that others can't. I mean, they can. So the fact that the science is out there in the public realm and that we would not be able to enforce anything would leave the door open for third parties to take the science and go to court.
Thank you. Representative Lewick.